Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Welcome to the Punch. So, immediately when going to this movie, I can't help but just think of the title. The title just seems so weird. But funny enough, when I go into this movie, I'm actually kind of won over by this movie, and I'm kind of won over by this story. Because we go on, and at first it seems like this movie is just like, oh, this is the a man that got away kind of story, and that's all that it's really going to be. But once we kind of further and further go into this story, it feels like there's just more than that going on. Plus, we kind of have this movie being like a chess piece kind of film or a strategy kind of film, where it seems like we're like, oh, like, so this is kind of a setup kind of thing where we find out all the pieces later on of how this all kind of gets connected. I'm like, oh, okay, I like a movie like that. It seems like it's been a while since I've seen a movie that is to do stuff like that. Like immediately, what kind of comes to mind to me is the movie like Hitman, like the Timothy Olyphant movie, Hitman, and so immediately when I go into this film, there's so much about this movie that feels like a Hitman movie, weirdly, especially when we have Mark Strong's character who's basically wearing a Hitman kind of suit. Uh, and I thought that was like so much about this was kind of very funny. So so going into this movie, I really just was, of course, to be quickly won over by this, and so currently in the second it's recording, you can probably conveniently watch this on Showtime. If technically you already have the Showtime app, you can probably watch Welcome to the Punch, and really also I'm sure there's a number of different apps you can probably rent this movie. If you have the money just lying around, you might as well. I can conveniently give you some other options that are much more free, honestly, if you want to go and check this out without any burden of paying, of course, for this. So conveniently, there's a certain number of apps that I would tell you to Google search here. You can go on and find an app called Letter C Movies, so C and then Movies, which is an app you can go ahead and download and be able to see whatever you'd like. Uh, Really, with some exceptions, but like brand new stuff, or there's some kind of old enough things that just aren't on there. But you can go on and exhaust the search engine to see like what isn't there. I would also recommend people to find an app called Fox HD Movies. If you go on and search for that app, you'll find out a logo that'll say Fox HD Movies, but the title will say something different. It'll say like Play 1080p HD Movies. And by golly, if you combine the powers of both these apps, you'll be able to see whatever you want. Uh, you can also go on and Google Play Store search a app called TV Crush, and you'll be able to find an app that says HD Movies with a little crown on there. You can go ahead and download that app and be able to see a number of items. So, with that said, I would have to say this is like grading wise. I would have to go on and say Welcome to the Punch is a fairly, like, I would say, like, I would probably have to say like a solid good film. Like, I don't know, I just, for the life of me, I can't say that it's great. The only problem that I have with this movie is there's just like so many little tiny pieces to get to the main thing, so to speak, the main dance. Um, there is some fun action parts of this movie, but there's so many little like tiny things in here that just kind of irk me. Hence why when eventually I'll go into spoilers about this, like I'm not going to go into heavily detail like this movie does, but I'm going to try to do my best to go on and talk about this movie in a spoiler like sense. So, with that said, I think I feel okay enough to go on into spoilers, but Yeah, I would heavily actually recommend this movie. Like, this movie was good enough to justify somebody going on and seeing. Like, a lot of people would probably compare this to like Heat, the Val Kilmer Robert De Niro movie, or really just any like heist film. But like, I don't feel like there's enough of the heist part to justify me just saying that easily. Because I feel like this is like there's a much more interesting story that really doesn't have much for a heist thing. I would much more want to compare this to like Hitman or something like that. Some other kind of Timothy Olyphant Hitman movie rather than. Anyways, so let's go on. Let's go to that double five. Let's otherwise just go into this thing called spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time we need to spoil this movie. So, the very beginning of the movie, we of course have this chase scene, which I'm like, okay, so you're kind of setting this up the right way. So it's a good way to just kind of like right out of the gate be like, okay, you got my interest movie. So, kind of like how this is kind of set up right at the bottom of this picture here, we have four men who are to go ahead and rob uh, this facility of sorts, and they go onto these motorcycles, and all of a sudden we have Max, who is to realize that Jacob Sternwood, who of course is to be Mark Strong's character, and Max, who of course is James McAvoy. Max is going on and finding out that they had put together this heist, so Max is going on and trying to chase them down with his car. So we have these four motorcycle robbers that are going on and just outmaneuvering Max in his car and going on and finding a bunch of staircases and a bunch of smaller locations that now Max cannot be able to chase them down with his car, and now he has to go on and chase them down by foot. Leading him, of course, to eventually get the jump on these motorcyclists by just kind of figuring out where they're going to head next. And so Max all of a sudden is to smack one of these motorcyclists and knock them down. Coincidentally, that just so happened to be Jacob's character. And so Max and Jacob are kind of tossing it out for Jacob to just shoot Max in the leg and then run off with this other motorcycle man and kind of get away from this. So we of course have Jacob, who is to make a pretty good killing off of this last heist, and so he's going on in seclusion in Iceland somewhere. And so all of a sudden we have Jacob, who is forcibly out of his seclusion because he is of course living in a home where there's like absolutely nothing around him. And so Jacob goes on and is to get a call from his son, who is Ruin, Ruan, Ruin. And so Ruin is to be on this airplane, and he is shot in the chest. And so Ruin is calling his father, telling him it's like, well, hey, I'm sorry that I failed, and this and that. And all of a sudden, we have Ruin, who collapses, and he goes to a hospital to, of course, get revived and kind of taken care of. So we have Max, who is, of course, to wake up and is going and putting a needle in his leg to be able to get out this kind of liquid that is inside of his knee, because I guess he needs to consistently drain it throughout this film. So Sarah is going on and picking Max up, who of course is his partner. And so Sarah's telling James is like, hey, like, are you gonna get going for work because we're already late? And so Max goes on and gets his work gear ready, and so both Max and Sarah are to make it to work, and so Nathan, of course, who is kind of running the show of this police department, is telling everybody what's going on. That that of course, Ruin is in the hospital, and it seems that Ruin had gotten or had done this phone call from a place in Iceland, which of course they naturally assume is to be Jacob's number, and so they're going to go on and try and track him down and take him down. And Max is like, that's a mistake. You guys should be waiting it out and trying some other alternative. And Nathan's like, excuse me? Excuse me? You got anything you have to share with the class? And Max doesn't really speak up. He just kind of goes with the flow of things. And so where Max doesn't say anything, Sarah kind of speaks up. She's like, well, I think you guys should come up with an alternate plan because I don't think that's going to work. So we like here's also one thing. We also had Max who was to have like this box of items, which like is did he had just moved into this place and he just never really cared to just move all of his items in? Like I don't really understand all that big lavish event um, of this box having to be opened and kind of checked or whatever. Um, I don't know. It didn't seem all that important, but I just wanted to mention that. So we then go on and have Max that's kind of going over Nathan's head, and he talks to Thomas. And Thomas, of course, is to uh, be, if you guys remember The Walking Dead, and if you've ever seen The Walking Dead, you know the governor, same guy who plays Thomas in this movie. So we of course have Max that goes on to Thomas and is to tell Thomas, it's like, well, hey, you should probably send Ruin to a local hospital and have people just kind of watching him 24/7 because Jacob is going to try to go and see his son. So if Jacob is going to go on and see his son, we can go on and catch him by him trying to go on and check up on his son so we can get him that way. So we have Jacob, who is, of course, kind of setting a bunch of stuff up, realizing that a lot of people are going to know that he is at this area. So he's kind of setting all these kind of little things up. And so all of a sudden, this like SWAT team makes their way to this guy's house, and so Jacob goes on and is to take down one of the SWAT men, and we are to naturally assume that this guy is to be driving away in this car, as well as these guys are trying to make it into the house, and the house blows up. So Jacob is supposedly driving into this car, and we actually find out that that's not true. That this car is just going on and driving itself, and so Jacob has kind of snuck away to eventually be uh, completely taken off guard by all these SWAT people, and he kind of gets out of the scene and is to go on and make his way back to his friend, who of course is Roy Edwards. So we of course have Jacob that's asking Roy. It's like, well, hey, what happened to my son? Like, how is it that this all happened? How is all this played out? So we we come to find out that Ruin had been tied to some police officers, and those police officers, of course, are dirty, and they had gone on to have this kind of large shipping container with a bunch of guns inside of it, and so weirdly, that is to lead eventually to Sarah figuring that out. But we'll get there in a minute here. So, and plus we also have it where like Jacob is asking like, hey, like who's Bartnick? Like, have you ever heard of him before, Roy? And Roy's just kind of like, nope, doesn't sound familiar. So we have Max, who's just kind of waiting it out in this hospital, and so Jacob is to kind of walk by with some kind of badge on, saying that he technically works there at this hospital, and he's kind of sweeping through his son's room, but he's not going to go inside of it because he realizes that there's probably a trap in place. So all of a sudden, this guy is walking by with these things of flowers, and is asking Jacob. It's like, well, hey, like, where is this room 45? And so Jacob is pointing him to Ron's room, so that way Jacob can see what happens if the if and when this guy goes into the room, and of course he does. So all of a sudden Maxwell is to come in there and tackle this guy down and arrest him, and he's like, aha, like, so there was a plan for me to go into that room. So all of a sudden Max is cuffing this guy. He's like, hey man, like, I went in the wrong room, I'm sorry. And so Maxwell's like, wait a minute, did somebody tell you to go into this room? And the guy's like, well, yeah. And it's like, who was he? And he starts describing him, and it's like, ah, like, that's Jacob. So Max starts chasing after Jacob, hoping that he's going to eventually stop him or grab him or whatever. And so Maxwell is to grab the first guy that he sees with this kind of cap and like an outfit that looks very similar to what Jacob was wearing, but it's another guy. So Jacob, of course, gets out of there, and so we have Jacob going on and telling Roy, his seemingly partner, it's like, well, hey, like, it seems like they have Ron kind of really well kind of like maneuvered, so we're gonna have to figure out some goofy way of how to get him out of there. So what ends up happening while like this whole thing is going on is later on we find out that Ruin, of course, is to die in his room, and so they're trying to revive him. They're trying to use like defibrillators, and he just dies. And so instead of releasing that Ruin is dead, Max goes on and tells Thomas, it's like, well, hey, like, let's delay this a couple of days before you like mention that this guy is dead, because I think there's a lot of people that want to go on and not want to know quite yet that this guy is dead. So kind of leave it on the kind of leave it. So Jacob goes on and is to go to Ruin's apartment room, knowing full well that Ruin would go and put himself under his mother's name at this hotel. So Jacob and Roy go to this apartment room, and they go on and spot uh, a little kind of knife that has blood on it, and they start kind of thumbing through this whole room. And so Jacob is to spot this ventilation shaft, and he starts opening it, and he's like, there's items here. So, like, there's kind of bloodied money, and there's a couple items. So, we have Jacob that's telling Roy that he wants him to let everybody know that Ruin was at this place, this apartment, and to try and see like who eventually comes when they leak that information out. So Roy goes on to go to this barber, and so this barber is, I guess, to be this guy that is to be this kind of social media person, and so this barber is kind of telling Roy, it's like, hey, I can just shave all that crap all over your face. And Roy is just like, well, you know what? Like, if you don't go on and put out this information, like, this old school guy is gonna beat the out of you, kind of thing. So the barber's like, okay, all right, I'll do whatever you want. So they release that information, and so Jacob is kind of setting up this room. He's going and having this like fire extinguisher like being put in the corner of here, and so kind of Jacob is just kind of waiting it out for either possibly the police to come or for either the other side of things, the bad guys to come. So Jacob's kind of waiting it out. All of a sudden, to have two policemen that end up coming into this this place. We have Harvey Crown that ends up coming on, and we also have another detective that comes in also. And so Jacob goes on, and he is defending himself, and he's doing a pretty good job. He ends up, of course, shooting that extinguisher, and we have the other detective that kind of scrambles out of this place as we have Jacob who shoots Harvey and then gets the heck out of there. We also have Max who is to get a tip about this apartment, and so he follows up on that lead for him to go and try and get to Jacob. But again, while Max is trying to kind of rush down these flight of stairs, he ends up hurting his knee, and then he can't go on and chase after Jacob. So Max goes on, and he is to uh, be in this hallway where he's just kind of waiting things out. He's kind of icing his knee. All of a sudden, Max is to find these pair of glasses. He's like, it's kind of weird. So Max goes on, and he, of course, is to talk to Thomas because things are kind of getting a little fishy. So Max goes and talks to Thomas and saying, like, well, why is it that two detectives from two different like departments were there going after Jacob? Doesn't make sense. Because Max is to immediately know that Nathan was to be one of the detectives to go after Jacob. And so, like, these two detectives don't make sense to be put together. And so Thomas is like, like, so there's something fishy going on here. So Sarah is to go on and figure out about this shipping container. And so she ends up following this lead, and that follows her to meet up with a guy named Dean Barnes, who is to also be like this ex-military guy who we find that he was to be putting guns in coffins of dead soldiers, and when he brought them all back, he brought them back in this shipping container. So Sarah follows that lead, and we of course have it where Dean is to go on and is to choke Sarah out, and is to put Sarah's body in Max's apartment in his bed to make it look like, I guess, they had some kind of affair or something like that, or they had some kind of like love making session that turned out wrong and that led to Sarah's death, yada yada yada. So now Max is to really start putting the pieces together, and Thomas is to go on to speak with a girl named Jane Badham. And so Thomas is to talk to her because he's getting a little worried that Max is starting to put all these pieces together because he too is tied to this whole thing. And so this woman who is trying to get this campaign going for some kind of political office is going on and just telling Thomas, it's like, well, like, just figure out a way to, like, figure our way out of this. So we have Jacob, who eventually is to talk to Nathan and want a word with him because he, of course, is asking Nathan, like, were you the one that shot my son? And Nathan is telling Jacob, it's like, well, no, but I can give you the man who did. So Jacob and Nathan are going to meet at this kind of weird arcade club, whatever it is. Like, it just feels like it's like a multi-purpose place. But there's like nothing really definitively here that tells you what this place is. It just feels like it's a bunch of random things. And Roy is to go on and plant, by some pinball machine, a spare gun for Jacob to grab and use, just in case he was going to get patted down at this location. So Jacob goes on and meets Nathan, and so Max is to also know about this place, and so he heads there also. So we have it where Jacob is to make it there for him to technically be uh, attempted to be gunned down by both Dean and both Nathan, and Max is to also help Jacob out in this situation. And so Jacob is to go and grab this gun from underneath this pinball machine and try to like fire back upon these men. So we have it, of course, where Nathan ends up getting killed trying to save Max, and Max and Jacob leave both at the same time trying to save one another. And so it seems like they're kind of technically partners here. So Jacob is wanting Max to tell him, hey, like, I want to see my son. Let's go and see my son. So Max is taking Jacob exactly where his son is at the morgue. So Jacob's like, "Oh my god, like what is this?" And Max is like, "Yeah, your son's dead. I'm sorry." And so Jacob starts crying, and we have both Max and Jacob that are having to leave. All of a sudden, bumping into another detective who is Jucca, who of course will be played by Daniel. And we find out that Jucca is to have found Sarah's body at Max's place, and is to say, it's like, hey, we found her body at your place. Like, what's going on? So all of a sudden, Max and Jucca are kind of like fighting it out, and he's like, seriously, you're gonna pull a gun on me? Like Max is saying this. And so Max is defending himself, and he realizes that Sarah's hand kind of falls out of this table, and he's like, oh my god, like, this is Sarah's hand, because he had seen her before, kind of writing all over her hand. And all of a sudden, she has this punch 119. And he's like, oh, I know the connection of that. I understand what that means. So we like, if anything, I apologize. There's probably going to be a dinging going on soon because the battery of my cell phone is pretty low. Because I really stretched this for as far as I could today, as far as getting a lot of stuff out. Um, so probably eventually there's going to be a little bit more than what I would normally do, but it probably won't all go out today. But it is what it is. Because I just realized that the latest Superman and Lois episode is out. So I'm gonna have to do that soon. So we go on into this story, and so both Jacob and Max are going after the last guy that was to still be alive there. That of course was Dean Warrens, and so they figure out who Dean Warrens is, and so they head to his place, where of course they're gonna put a gun to Dean's mother's head, and as his mother is trying to make some kind of phone call telling him to come home, all of a sudden all these guys are kind of sitting next to her and they have a gun to her head, and they're just kind of asking him questions about him being in the military, and basically accusing him of what I've all just kind of said there. There was a bunch of guns that were all stacked into a bunch of military men's coffins. And so we go on to this story and have Dean, who is to have kind of a gun in his pocket. And so he starts going on and whipping out this gun and firing upon these men. And he tries to run out of here, but he ends up getting shot in the arm and he falls over. So we have Roy that ends up getting shot in kind of like the chest area. And so Jacob is telling Roy to kind of stay here. And so Roy is apologizing for Jacob about what had all happened to his son. So Jacob and Max make it to that container. And so while making it there, Thomas is to make his way there because, of course, Max is to call him there. So they catch Thomas off guard and they kind of ram him with this forklift. And so he's really caught off guard. And so Thomas gets out of this car that he's in. And so they go on and they torture him for information. They go on and they start like shooting him in the arm, and they're trying to get him to confess and spill the beans about all of this. I'm like, you guys should have probably had this like tape recorded or something like that to get all the information. So Thomas starts spilling his guts about everything, and so all of a sudden all these men, all these SWAT team like men starts coming out to start taking down both Max and Jacob, and both Max and Jacob are kind of defending themselves. Honestly, Jacob's doing a little bit better than Max is, but eventually Max is to also help and defend Jacob at some points. But so we have it where, because we have like Dean, who is almost going to kill Jacob, and Max comes in, swoops in, and shotguns Dean and kills him off. And so we have it where Thomas is talking to Max and talking about what all is to happen. That this politician that, of course, is to be running against this other candidate, they wanted to try and pull some kind of gun scandal on this other politician to kind of get him out of the running, so this woman would be running unopposed. And so they were hoping that that would all just work out, and it didn't. So we then go on and have Jacob, who is to, of course, shoot uh, Thomas. And then we have it seemingly where we're thinking that Max is going to like pull a gun on Jacob and then arrest him and finally like, I finally got them. I finally got my man. I finally got the guy that I've been chasing after for all this time. But instead, Max goes and he puts his gun down and he lets Jacob just run away. So Max goes on and he is to be kind of putting his hands up and kind of putting his gun down because the police is kind of swarming in, and they're of course going to arrest Max, and hopefully like he's not going to go down for any murder or anything like that. He's going to be absolved of all this and be perfectly fine. So with that said, that technically covers most of this story, and that's the way of which that I want this movie to end. In the end of it all, probably didn't go through a lot of the heavy details about this movie, but I did the best of which that I could. So with that said, I think I'm going to get out of here. Bye, buddy. Bye, buddy.